He doesn't talk about her much anymore. Not in public, not even in passing. But if you watch closely, you'll see how his eyes shift when someone brings up a name that sounds like hers. How he smiles politely, then goes quiet for just a second too long. It's been years. Years of moving on, of building things, of appearing composed. But he hasn't forgotten. Not her. He's done the work. Therapy, travel, new faces, better choices. He knows how to name his patterns now. He's not the man he was back then. And yet, something in him still returns to her. Not out of longing, not even love in the romantic sense, but a kind of ache that never found a name. She wasn't the most beautiful woman he'd ever met. Not by the standards people measure, but she was the most real. And realness, he learned, isn't always comfortable. Realness doesn't ask for permission before it enters. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. It shows up like a mirror, and suddenly you're naked before your own reflection. That's what she did. She saw something in him he had spent a lifetime hiding. Not the charming parts, not the ambition. She looked past the practiced smiles and touched the quiet boy inside, the one who had questions but never voiced them. The one who feared being too much and not enough at the same time. He doesn't remember their last conversation clearly, but he remembers how he felt after. Unsettled, awakened, like something had cracked open and refused to shut again. It wasn't a breakup. It wasn't even a tragedy. It was more like a shift, a collision with something ancient, something unspoken. And once it happened, nothing was ever quite the same. So no, he doesn't talk about her. But she lives in the pauses, in the songs he skips, in the books he can't finish, in the way he's careful now, more sensitive, more distant, more honest. What was it about her? Why does she still echo inside him like a secret never fully told? The answer lies not in her, but in what she awakened. And that's where we begin. Carl Jung once said that every man carries within him the eternal image of woman, not the image of any specific woman, but an archetype, a shape drawn by the unconscious. He called it the Anima. To most people that sounds poetic, maybe even abstract, but to Jung, it was deadly serious. The Anima, he believed, was the feminine soul inside every manner part of his psyche, not shaped by logic or society, but by something far older. It is where a man's deepest feelings, longings, fears, and instincts reside. It's the inner presence that whispers through dreams, pulls through music, and hides behind obsessions that make no rational sense. The Anima isn't about femininity in the outer sense. It's not about liking soft colors or gentle things. It is the emotional compass, the intuitive depth, the mystery that connects a man to something beyond words. And here's the part most men don't realize. If you never meet your Anima consciously, you will project her onto a woman in your life, usually without knowing it. You don't just fall in love. You recognize, you see something in her that you forgot was even part of you. And it's terrifying, because the Anima doesn't show up politely. She doesn't care if you're ready. She arrives in the form of a woman who makes you feel more than you can understand, who triggers responses you can't explain. This is why some men, even strong men, can become undone in the presence of a certain woman. It's not about lust. It's not even about romance. It's something older, a knowing, an unlocking. And here's the twist. The Anima isn't always kind. She holds beauty, yes, but also chaos, seduction, rage, sorrow. She is not a fantasy. She is the mirror of your inner world. And depending on how fragmented that world is, meeting her can feel like salvation or madness. When a woman enters a man's life and touches this part without meaning to, without even understanding it herself, she becomes unforgettable. Not because she's flawless, not because she's his ideal, but because she activated something sacred and buried. She made his unconscious conscious, and there is no going back from that. Jung warned that men who remain disconnected from their anima tend to become dry, rigid, overly rational. They lose their poetry. They lose their capacity for inner life. But when the anima is awakened, suddenly the man feels again. He becomes vulnerable, raw, and often afraid. This fear isn't weakness, it's confrontation. The anima brings him face to face with his unlived life, with the tenderness he buried, the sensitivity he shamed, the dreams he laughed off as childish. She brings with her questions, not answers. But those questions are sacred. Who are you beneath the roles? What are you running from? What did you feel before you learned to numb? She may not stay. Often she doesn't, because her role isn't always to remain. Sometimes her purpose is to open the gate, to pull back the veil. And when she leaves, the man is not the same. He walks differently. He listens more carefully. He aches more honestly, because he has met the part of himself that cannot be controlled, and in doing so, he has begun to remember. This is why some women are unforgettable. It is not about charm, or beauty, or compatibility. It is because they awakened his anima. They didn't try to. They didn't know they were doing it. But they showed up like a mirror to his soul. And suddenly, he could see himself, not the version he performs, but the one that waits in silence. And that's the truth most men don't know how to name. They don't miss her. They miss who they were becoming when she was near. She wasn't the most beautiful woman in the room, not by the standards most people recognize. She didn't command attention with dramatic gestures or curated aesthetics. In fact, many might have overlooked her at first glance. But for him, something shifted the moment she entered. It wasn't how she looked, it was how she felt. Her presence was quiet but undeniable, like the low hum of a frequency only he could hear. Something about her made the air different, thicker, slower, heavier in the best kind of way. She didn't perform. She didn't chase attention. She just was. And that being carried a depth he couldn't explain. You see, the women who awaken a man's unconscious aren't always the loudest, the boldest, or the ones society celebrates. They are the ones who reflect. They show you something about yourself you didn't know was waiting. Her power was not in decoration but in perception. She saw through things, through people, through him, and not in the way that makes you feel exposed or judged, but in the way that makes you feel known. That's the part he still can't forget. Because when a man is truly seen not for his status, not for his utility, but for the weight he carries behind his ice, it disarms him. It confuses him. Most of all, it softens him. That's what she did. She wasn't trying to heal him. She wasn't trying to change him. She was just deeply rooted in herself. And that kind of rootedness is magnetic to a man who's been drifting. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Her laughter wasn't constant, but it echoed. She didn't speak in grand declarations, but when she did speak, her words landed. They lingered. And maybe that's the word he's been looking for all this time. Linger. She lingers. Not like perfume, not like memory, but like resonance. Like something ancient that woke up when she was near. It's easy to be impressed by someone's beauty. It's much harder to be moved by someone's presence. She moved him, but not in the way most women do. She didn't inspire fantasies. She inspired questions. She didn't make him feel powerful. She made him feel real. And that kind of feeling, raw, grounding, almost too close, is not something men are taught to chase. In fact, it terrifies many. Because when a woman makes you feel deeply, when she activates parts of you that were dormant, you start to realize how much of yourself you've abandoned just to survive. She wasn't trying to be mysterious. She simply didn't need to be understood by everyone. And there's something disarming about a woman who doesn't seek explanation. It forces you to meet her in silence, to slow down, to observe. He noticed her when she wasn't looking, when she was lost in thought, when she paused before answering, when she listened not just to him but to life. She moved like someone who had made peace with her shadows, who had bled and still chose softness, who could sit in chaos and not become it. And that's what men remember, not the curve of her body, but the curve of her insight, not the colors she wore, but the way she saw the world. Not how she made him feel like a man, but how she reminded him he was also human. There are women who dazzle, and then there are women who disturb in the best possible way. The ones who reach into your structure and ask, without saying a word, "Is this really who you are?" And that's the difference. The beautiful woman captures attention. The deep woman changes direction. He may have loved others. He may have laughed harder, flirted more, felt safe. But with her he felt seen, and that changed him. Because when a woman touches your unconscious, she doesn't just enter your life. She enters your architecture. She alters the way your inner walls are built. And even when she's gone, those walls remain different. That's why he can't forget her. Not because she was the most anything, but because she was the only one who ever made him meet himself. And once you've met yourself, even for a moment, the echo never really stops. When a man encounters his anima not as an idea, but as a living experience, it doesn't feel like discovery. It feels like disturbance, a quiet disruption that unthreads the way he once understood himself. At first, it's fascination. He feels drawn to her, though he can't explain why. It's not just attraction, it's deeper, stranger. There's something about her energy, her stillness, her gaze. She holds something he spent his whole life circling but never touching. And that something is ancient. He begins to notice how different she is from what he's used to. She doesn't flatter. She reflects. She doesn't chase. She reveals. And what she reveals isn't about her, it's about him. He starts to feel emotions he doesn't recognize. Not because they're new, but because they were buried. She awakens things he didn't know he'd forgotten. The longing to feel without shame. The ache for meaning, not performance. The desire to surrender without losing control. And as these things rise, so does fear. Because awakening the anima is not a romantic process. It's an initiation. His mind begins to obsess. Not in a needy way, but in a compulsive, almost mythic way. He thinks about her in moments that don't make sense. He replays their conversations. He questions himself, why did that line hit so hard? Why does her silence stay with me? He begins to dream differently. And not just during sleep, his waking mind starts to drift. Not into fantasy, but into depth, into memory, into symbol. He starts to notice the layers of things, the symbolism in small gestures, the echo in her voice, the pattern in her presence. And then comes the confusion, because the man he thought he was the one who had it together, who followed logic, who mastered control, begins to feel like a shell. And inside that shell, something softer, truer, begins to stir. It's disorienting. He wants to run, but he also wants to stay. He wants to hold on, but also let go. He is both terrified and captivated. This is the paradox of the anima. She makes him feel more alive than he ever has, and in the same breath, more unsure than he's ever been. She doesn't just challenge his preferences, she challenges his identity, because the anima is not here to flatter the ego. She is here to confront it, to strip away the armor of performance, to ask him not directly but deeply, who were you before the world told you who to be? Some men resist. They double down on distraction. They label her too intense, too much, too confusing. They ghost. They detach. They rationalize. But underneath the rationalization is fear, not of her, of themselves. Others break open. They allow the unraveling. They let the discomfort guide them inward. And in that inward turn, they find what she mirrored: the neglected child, the silenced dream, the unwept grief. And here's what most men discover. Too late, the woman wasn't the destination. She was the catalyst. She didn't come to complete him. She came to awaken what was already inside, waiting to be claimed. And once awakened, the journey begins. He may pull away from her. He may lose her entirely. But the imprint remains. The echo stays. Because she didn't just pass through his life, she passed through his structure. And now he walks differently. He notices more, feels more, listens more, not to the noise, but to the silence, to the pull beneath the surface. He becomes aware of his patterns, his reactions, his fears. He begins to question the roles he's played for so long, roles that made him useful, respected, admired, but never whole. This is not about romance. It's about revelation. The Anima doesn't offer comfort. She offers confrontation. She pulls the man into the dark river of himself and says, without speaking, swim. And if he does, if he dares to face what she illuminated, he emerges not as someone new, but as someone real. That's the journey. That's why he can't forget her. Not because she gave him something, but because she showed him what was missing. Carl Jung didn't write for comfort. He wrote for confrontation. And one of the truths he dared to speak on that many men still struggle to face is this: the part of you that you repress the most is the part most capable of saving you. He called it the shadow. He called it the anima. He gave names to the unseen forces within the male psyche that shape behavior, desire, and even silence. And he warned that what remains unconscious does not disappear, it controls you from within. Until you make the unconscious conscious, Jung wrote, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. It sounds dramatic until you realize how many men live this way. How many bury their tenderness, their fears, their dreams, and wear instead the mask of control, of certainty, of stoic composure. They don't know they're performing. They just think that's what strength looks like. But Jung saw through that. He understood that men were not less emotional than women. They were simply trained to distrust their inner life. And when you sever yourself from your own feeling, you don't become stronger, you become fragmented, rigid, cold, aching for something you can't name. That is where the anima comes in. Jung described the anima as the archetype of life itself. She holds everything a man has forgotten: his instinct, his imagination, his vulnerability, his grief. She holds it not as a weapon, but as an invitation. And that invitation often arrives in the form of a woman. Not just any woman, but one who, by her very presence, stirs the waters he worked so hard to keep still. He may see her as mystery, as chaos, as beauty, as danger. But what she really is a mirror. Jung warned that if a man remains unconscious of his anima, he will project her onto the women around him. He will idealize them, fear them, resent them, worship them, but never truly see them. Because what he's reacting to isn't the myths, the disowned feminine within himself. Man is not meant to be complete in himself, Jung wrote. He must meet his opposite, his counterpart. But here's the part that most men never say out loud. Meeting your inner feminine doesn't feel graceful. It feels like collapse. You feel exposed, softened, unsure. The woman who activates your anima doesn't just make you feel something. She makes you feel everything all at once. And it's overwhelming. It disrupts the armor. It shakes the foundation. It threatens the carefully managed image you've spent decades building. Jung believed this collapse was necessary. He wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And that's why so many resist it. That's why men deny their feelings, run from depth, mock vulnerability, and stay loyal to surfaces. Not because they are incapable of depth, but because they are terrified of what depth might reveal. The Anima reveals. She reveals the wound that has been masked by achievement, the longing that has been muted by performance, the grief that has been buried beneath competence. She reveals that all your strength has come at a co-stand. The cost was you. This is the truth men don't talk about. They fear being seen not because they lack confidence, but because being seen would mean admitting how much they've hidden, how much they've performed, how much they've been afraid to feel. And yet, Jung didn't offer this truth to shame men. He offered it to free them. Because once you face your Anima, once you meet her not as projection, but as part of your own soul, you begin to return. You return to instinct, to emotion, to truth. Not the truth others told you to be, the truth you always were. It's easy to assume he can't forget her, because she was special, and in many ways she was. But the reason she lingers beyond time, beyond logicis, not just about her, it's about what she reflected. When Jung spoke of the Anima, he often pointed to her roots in the earliest relationships a man forms, especially the one with his mother. Not the mother as a person, but the mother as symbol, as the first embodiment of feminine energy he encounters. If that bond was inconsistent, cold, or conditional, a hunger forms, a quiet craving for warmth, for reflection, for being held not physically, but emotionally. Most men don't even realize they carry this hunger. It hides beneath ambition, beneath desire, beneath control. But it's there. A need not just for a woman, but for reconnection with the part of themselves they learned to mute. Then she appears, not to mother him, not to fix him, but to reflect something missing. She moves with emotional fluency, with depth, with a calm that doesn't demand. And suddenly, without effort, she bypasses his defenses. Not through seduction, through presence. She embodies something he lost. And that's what breaks him open. It's not about her body, or her voice, or even her words. It's the way she exists, the way she listens without rescuing, the way she holds her own sadness without needing him to carry it, the way she doesn't need to be understood, to remain grounded. For a man who has spent years performing, this is disarming, and it touches something older than romance. It touches the child inside him who never felt fully seen, who learned that emotion was dangerous, that need was weakness, that silence was safer than truth. She doesn't heal that wound. She doesn't have to. She simply stands in front of it, and in doing so, brings it into the light. And when he looks at her, what he feels isn't just love. It's recognition, a sense of home he never knew he lost, a warmth that doesn't try to fix, but allows, a peace he never earned, but always wanted. That's why he can't forget her, because forgetting her would mean forgetting what she showed him, about his mother, about his wounds, about his need for intimacy that doesn't ask for performance. She wasn't the answer, she was the mirror. And the hardest mirrors to forget are the ones that show you not who you are, but who you were before you learned to hide. Not every woman who awakens the Anima is meant to stay. That's the part no one wants to hear. We tell stories of great love, of lasting connection, of finding the one who changes everything and then walks beside us forever. But sometimes, the one who changes everything does so only by passing through. She enters quietly, leaves subtly, and in between, she unlocks a door the man never knew existed. He may spend years trying to understand what went wrong, why it didn't work, why she left. But what if it was never meant to be about working? What if she didn't come to complete the story but to start it? Jung understood this. He saw the anima not as a lover to be possessed, but as a guide, a messenger from the unconscious. And messengers don't always linger. They come when the psyche is ready. They stir the dust. They open the forgotten drawer. They shine a light into the sealed room, and then they vanish. Because their purpose was never comfort. Their purpose was transformation. She didn't stay because staying wasn't her role. Her presence wasn't a promise, it was a portal. She reminded him of his capacity to feel, to break, to soften, and that reminder was enough to change the course of his life. The grief he feels isn't just about her absence. It's about the life he saw for a moment through her. A life of depth, of emotional presence, of truth. She embodied something he didn't know how to hold, and maybe he still doesn't. But that doesn't mean it was a mistake. It means it was sacred. There are women who stay, who build, who hold space through time. And then there are women who arrive like storms brief, beautiful and devastating. They don't destroy, they reveal. And sometimes, that revelation is all that's needed. She didn't come to be his forever. She came to remind him that forever exists within, that he has more to feel, more to become, that the man he thought he was is only the beginning. She didn't come to belong. She came to awaken. And awakenings rarely ask permission. Have you ever walked into someone's life and felt the shift? Not because you tried to impress, not because you chased, but simply because you showed up real, unfiltered, present. And suddenly, the air between you held weight. He looked at you, but behind his eyes was something deeper: confusion, maybe fear, maybe awe, like he saw something he wasn't ready to see. Have you ever noticed how some men pull back, not when you give less, but when you give more of your truth? Not the soft truth that flatters, but the sharp one that cuts through masks. The truth of your stillness, your sadness, your honesty, the way you sit with silence instead of filling it, the way you don't apologize for your depth. And then he retreats, not because you did anything wrong, but because your presence cracked something open in him, because without meaning to, you mirrored the part of him he'd spent years avoiding. This is not about blame. This is about recognition. You didn't break him. You didn't overwhelm him. You didn't ask for too much. You simply showed him something he wasn't ready to hold. And that kind of realness doesn't always get received, it gets remembered. Maybe you still think about it. Maybe you wonder why it didn't last, why it ended so quietly, or why he seemed so drawn to you and then so afraid. But what if it wasn't about staying? What if you were the door, the reminder, the mirror? Some women are meant to stay, to build, to grow with someone over time. But some are meant to awaken. And awakening is not always welcomed, but it is always felt. So if you've ever walked away from a man who couldn't meet you, not because you were too much, but because you were too true, remember this: you didn't fail him, you found him. And sometimes that is more powerful than being kept. If you are that mantha, one who still remembers, still wonders, still carries a quiet ache when no one is looking, this part is for you. You've probably tried to forget her, tried to explain it away, told yourself it was just timing, just chemistry, just one of those things. You've tried to move on, dated others, distracted yourself, grown wiser, more grounded, and yet, there she is. Not in your daily thoughts, maybe, but in the pause before you answer a deep question, in the way you hesitate before vulnerability, in the part of you that knows you felt something real once and haven't quite touched it since. But what if the point was never to forget? What if she wasn't just someone you loved, but someone who woke you up? Because that's what the anima does. She doesn't arrive to fulfill fantasy. She arrives to reveal what you've been missing inside yourself. That feeling she stirred in you, the awe, the fear, the desire to be better, the sense of being exposed but safe. It wasn't just about her. It was your unconscious speaking for the first time in years. It was your inner world remembering itself. You didn't fall in love with her. You fell in love with who you were becoming in her presence. That's the part no one talks about. The woman isn't the treasure. The awakening she triggered is. And you cannot replace that with another face, another body, another name. Because what you felt wasn't possession, it was revelation. So stop trying to bury it. Stop framing it as loss. Begin to see it as initiation. Ask yourself not why it ended, but why it mattered. What did she reflect that you had disowned? What did you feel with her that scared you? What part of yourself became visible when she was near? This is not about longing. It's about integration. The goal isn't to get her back. It's to get yourself back, the version of you she called forward. The one who felt, who listened, who softened, who questioned. You don't have to hold on to her, but you must hold on to what she showed you, because she didn't come to stay. She came to remind you that you are deeper than you thought, more tender than you've admitted, and more unfinished than you've allowed yourself to be. And if you let that truth reshape you, then she was never lost. She was the beginning. She wasn't meant to be yours. That was never the point. She was never the destination. She was the mirror, the echo, the soft disruption that made you stop and see yourself. Not the version you show the world. Not the one that wins, impresses, performs, but the one underneath, the one you forgot. She entered your life, not to stay, but to stir something sacred, to remind you that even within the routines, the armor, the quiet resignation of manhood, there is still a soul longing to be remembered, a softness you buried, a truth you silenced. She didn't ask you to change. She didn't give you answers. She simply stood still, and her stillness revealed your storm. And that is why you remember her. Because she called something out of you that no one else dared to name. Because her presence wasn't comforting, it was clarifying. She made you feel unsafe in the best possible way. She made you question what you thought you knew. About love, about control, about strength. But more than anything, she made you remember what it feels like to be whole. Not because she completed you, because she showed you what you had abandoned. This is the work Jung pointed to. Not to chase what awakens you, but to become it. To stop searching for her outside and begin finding her within. Because the Anima is not just a woman. She is a mirror to the unlived life inside you. You may never see her again. Or maybe you will, but that's not the point anymore. What matters now is what you do with what she left behind. The questions, the tenderness, the sudden awareness that something in you is still unfinished, still wild, still worthy of depth. So don't try to possess her. Honor her. Honor what she woke up in you, because she wasn't sent to stay. She was sent to remind you. You are not a machine. You are not a mask. You are not just a provider, a planner, a protector. You are also a soul. And she was just the one who helped you remember.